In my country, Latinx Americans are twice as likely as their white counterparts to face toxic pollution. Black men are overrepresented by a factor of 3 in our criminal justice institution, and colonialism forced indigenous nations onto contaminated land as a solution. It's time to dismantle disparate distribution.
In this world, it is assumed that women, queer folks, disabled people, children, and men of color will take a place of submission. Acknowledging marginalized stakeholders somehow requires someone else's permission. Concern for non-human animals and the needs of future generations seems a guaranteed omission. It's time to realize radical recognition.
In our communities, no longer are we willing to wait for change, breath-baited in anticipation, because we know that we have had to fight for every stage of emancipation, and making space for equitable decision-making is an ally's true occupation. It is time to promote public participation.
Welcome to Climates of Resistance. This class is inspired by America's March on Washington and Australia's Aboriginal Tent Embassy, legislative protests that have left us a legacy, by disabled organizers at the 504 sit-in, demonstrating how good laws are written, by the Black trans women of Stonewall, they who planted seeds that have grown tall in the face of oppression, knowing the persistence of resistance isn't in question, by the Freedom Riders, providers of a history promising us the mystery of justice, and that it's not just us.
As the indigenous youth of Standing Rock create a landing block for defiance, we know diversity doesn't mean adversity. Struggles are connected. Wrongs must be corrected. Rights can be collected when we follow in the wake of these giants.
And that is what we swear today. Promising we can share a way to a future where we care to play by rules that let us dare to say, is this a class or a movement? This is our existence. This is our insistence. Welcome to Climates of Resistance.
Welcome indeed. Hello, everyone. Hello, everybody. Hello, every person here. You are most welcome to the Climates of Resistance Community Showcase. My name is Garrett Turner, and I'm your MC for today's event. Today's event will feature research and artwork created from a class about environmental racism. The spoken word piece you just heard summarizes this course, an examination of injustice, yes, but also a study and celebration of the power expressed by marginalized communities through collective action in order to redress that injustice. Now, a few housekeeping notes as we begin. We are being recorded, and we ask you to keep your microphones on mute unless you are presenting. There isn't going to be much time for questions in between presentations, but please make use of the chat function to ask questions and make comments about the work. We would love to hear your ideas and your feedback. Over the next hour, we are going to experience a range of materials created by students in this course, which was an online class offered by Syracuse Abroad. Now, there are relatively few benefits to online learning. We're all sick to death of Zoom. I know that's true for me, at least. But there are a couple of advantages to this virtual space. And one of them is being able to bring in so many different perspectives to a shared classroom. This fall, students enrolled in Climates of Resistance were studying at 5 different campuses on 3 different continents. Some were at Syracuse University's main campus in central New York State. Syracuse sits on the land of the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee. One of the students, who I had the pleasure of meeting in person during her studies this semester, is studying at the New York City campus, near where I am calling in from today. New York City is home to the largest urban Native American population in the United States. I live on Lenape lands, though my ancestors came here not as colonizing settlers, but as enslaved persons kidnapped by those settlers. the professor for this class, Dr. Rebecca Leanne Farnham, and several of the other students are based at Syracuse, London, the university's study abroad campus in the UK. Another 2 students studied at the Central Europe Center, where they had the opportunity to examine issues faced by the Roma people and migrant communities in Poland. And finally, we had 1 student studying abroad in Korea, meaning that the class meetings spanned 14 hours difference across time zones, and a huge range of everyday cultures and experiences were brought into class conversations. So, as I've been giving some context to this class community, you will have heard me make a few land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements are often performed as a mostly political exercise to recognize Indigenous peoples. They are generally completed without any true intention to decolonize the land or change our behavior. But one of the things this class explored is how land acknowledgement is also a long-standing Indigenous practice of acknowledging the land itself as a living being and valued relative. And so I invite you now to take a minute to notice where you are. Feel the ground beneath you, connect with the earth around you, and to breathe.
Breathe in the air. Watch the trees sway. The water flows down the stream to the bay. I can't help but think to myself how beautiful this land appears to be. The water speaks so loudly, it helps give life to everything surrounding. Yet I reflect on the past and it brings me back. It is I who is standing on this stolen land.
Those words and images were from Bianca Indelicato, reflecting on her experiences in United States national parks, land that was stolen from the indigenous people of Turtle Island, and where today Black people make up less than 2% of visitors, even though we're nearly 14% of the country's population. Even though the fates of minority communities and natural spaces are inextricably intertwined, we are often positioned in opposition to each other. We're going to hear next from Jennifer Angier, who will present a piece of artwork reflecting on this place called Turtle Island and the connection of land acknowledgement to environmental conservation.
Yeah, so this is a painting I created. It sort of has twofold meaning. I was initially focused on sea turtles and plastic and trash in the ocean. But then I started playing around with the Haudenosaunee origin story of Turtle Island, which refers to sort of all the North American territories. So I thought about how that encompassed the land, the air, water, and all of the animals that is contained within that. So I represented those as my underrepresented stakeholders, and I showed deforestation, which is responsible for 15% of greenhouse gas emissions and destruction of habitat for animals. I showed factories that spewed pollution into the air, and on the right is an oil drill just relentlessly digging into the turtle's back. And then I also showed rivers flowing off the side of the turtle. That was meant to represent their veins and sort of how they're being bled dry by overconsumption and reckless disregard of resources. So yeah, this was meant to show that saving the turtles from plastic in the ocean and saving Turtle Island as a whole are very interconnected movements, and they sort of require the same things from us.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Jennifer. Thank you for that. And it strikes me that just a brilliant way of showing how the island itself is alive, is to make the island the turtle, reframing our view. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Jennifer and her classmates have been studying the issues she spoke about through the lens of environmental justice. And for the rest of our time, they'd like to share with you a few highlights from their semester. The rest of today's event is organized by three primary dimensions of environmental justice: distribution, recognition, and participation. Can y'all say that with me from your muted spaces at home? Distribution, recognition, and participation. Yes, very well done. We're going to start with some heavier material. The reality of risk, redlining, and resource inequalities. But we promise to spotlight solutions and hope as well. To get us started, here's Kiana Khoshnoud with some news about unjust proximity to floodplains in Norfolk. She will then pass it to Jude Scanlon, who is going to critique the impacts of racial zoning in Syracuse. And finally, Julia Evans Asano will share insights from an oil refinery in the Virgin Islands. Kiana, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kiana Khoshnoud and I want to share with you my report on why environmental justice is needed in Norfolk, Virginia. So Norfolk is a coastal city south of the Chesapeake Bay at the Atlantic Ocean in Virginia. Norfolk is unlike most major American cities in that a significant percentage of its population, 43%, identifies as Black, and 9% of the city currently falls within the 5-year floodplain. While it may be easy to miss the connection of demographic and flooding, it is important to first understand environmental justice. Simply put, environmental justice means that there is a fair treatment of people regarding environmental policies. This is very important because in many instances, environmental hazards disproportionately affect people of color and minority communities. So you may ask, why is environmental justice needed in Norfolk, Virginia? As Norfolk is facing the threat of sea level rise, the city decides how to respond to said crisis. It is important to note that despite the demographic being 43% Black, that doesn't mean that representation is in the power structure of the city. When it comes to sea level rise, either the city will create mitigation systems or abandon said area. In areas of lower social vulnerability, property is more likely to be protected than abandoned. This becomes an environmental injustice because the areas abandoned due to flooding will tend to be majority Black communities. The data from this article is coming from the William and Mary Law School Scholarship. So while the article is mentioning that the funding for this specific project is coming from Virginia, the mission of the Virginia Environmental Endowment is to improve the quality of the environment by using its expertise and resources to encourage all the sectors to work together to conserve natural resources, protect, and promote environmental literacy. So what we want to also look at is that basically the statistics pulled from this piece were based on this 5-year scale of sea level rise. And so with this being 5 years, it does not tell us the larger overview to expect what would happen in Norfolk, but it does provide a smaller scale, which is simpler to understand. So I want to point out the quote on this screen that says, Norfolk is unlike most American cities in that a significant percentage of its population, 43%, identifies as Black, and 19% of the city currently falls within the 5-year floodplain. And in this graphic, I show you where Norfolk is, right on the edge of Virginia, and also how a lot of the times Black persons will be put on the areas closer to flooding, and then these areas will not be protective when flooding happens, and these people will lose their homes. So thank you for listening to my report. Oh, and I want to pass it off to Jude.
Hello, my name is Jude Scanlon. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. And I apologize, I'm not the best visual artist, but let's see. Growing up in the city of Syracuse, New York, the direct benefits and detriments of Interstate 81 have impacted my life in many ways without me even knowing. The highway is reaching the end of its life, and there has been an ongoing debate over how to proceed. Some people believe the highway should be rebuilt, while others think that the highway should be taken down completely and replaced by a large street/commercial boulevard. Regardless, the center of this debate has much to do with environmental racism. Redlining is a discriminatory practice for increasing home ownership in the late 1930s and 40s. The process involves breaking the city into sections based on race and economic class in order to distribute housing loans. These sections were given a color representing their level of loan risk. Criteria for this risk was determined by the observed condition of the buildings and the ethnicity of the people living in them. Green-colored areas meant residents could receive 100% backing, and blue meant 85%. By contrast, yellow signified only 15% of backing and red 0%. Red 0%, sorry. According to Odetta Kushi, home ownership accounts for 75% of asset wealth in the working class. So by literally blocking minorities from getting housing loans, redlining made it near impossible for those born into poverty to ever break the cycle. Minorities in the middle class were also denied loans and pushed down into poverty. The 15th Ward is an example of a racially diverse neighborhood that flourished with continuous growth until it was economically destroyed by redlining, then physically destroyed by the 1965 Highway Act and construction of Interstate 81. The combined division of communities with redlining and Interstate 81 was a well-calculated plan to increase racial discrimination and financial inequality in Syracuse. As a result, in 2016, 41,000 people living in the city of Syracuse were below the national poverty line. This data comes from the government-funded website, cnyvitals.org. Just 5 years ago, the city of Syracuse had the highest concentration of poverty in America. Neighborhoods displaced by Interstate 81 now suffer from a lack of access to affordable, healthy foods, green spaces, economic development, and communal institutions. The highway divides and displaces minorities and releases pollution to residents in the form of exhaust material, causing increased health issues. This government-enforced denial of opportunity and basic human survival needs manifests itself in the 13 homicides that have occurred so far in Syracuse this year, with most being individuals under the age of 25. As shown by statistical analysis, there is a clear cause and effect pattern from redlining in the construction of Interstate 81. Laws passed during the segregation and Jim Crow era have denied minorities basic human rights and opportunity, creating and enforcing a vicious cycle of poverty in those communities. We need to be aware and actively fighting these destructive practices that are woven into social and economic institutions of our daily life. Thank you. I'm now going to pass it to Julia Evans Asano.
Jude, if you could share your screen so I can share screen. So when looking at environmental racism, I think that locality plays a large role in how we think about environmental racism. And so I wanted to look at a case study of the US Virgin Islands, as it is a US territory that is located in the Pacific Ocean. St. Croix in the United States Virgin Islands has been experiencing gradual leakage of oil from the Hovensa oil refinery, otherwise known as Lime Tree Bay Refining, for several decades. In May 2021, the Biden administration finally shut down this refinery as it posed an imminent threat to people's health. This case represents one of the rare moments where the Environmental Protection Agency has stepped in under the condition of the Clean Air Act, and it has only used this power 3 times before. The interesting thing about the Hovensa oil refinery is that it has had a dark history, not just overall, that the state of St. Croix has had colonial history of being under the Dutch as well as the French before it became a US territory. It has also experienced indigenous genocide as well as slavery, and being a state that has been established as a sugar plantation, and also that this Hovensa oil refinery has gone through multiple management issues where it has gone under the hands of different companies, has been shut down multiple times for finance reasons, and has undergone many name changes. The fact that, as you can see in the statistic, there have been 44,540,167 gallons of oil spilled in the US Virgin Islands around St. Croix over the past decades, for the multiple decades, and it's still ongoing and has not been fully cleaned up. And it is said in the EPA reports that 99% of the spill has been cleaned up as of now, and the spill includes phase-separated petroleum hydrocarbons. However, the numbers never tell us, and the reports never tell us how much was originally spilled. And the issue with locality is, if this were within the continental territory of the US, things would have been cleaned up much quicker and things would have been reacted to much quicker. And we can see that with the oil spill that happened recently in California. The oil spill in California only had 25,000 gallons of oil spilled, and that was cleaned up within a week. And it comes to show that the language that is used when highlighting these issues is problematic, because in the reports it is saying that the Biden administration is in some way a hero because it has finally stepped in and shut down this oil refinery. But the oil refinery isn't shut down permanently, it's just currently shut down temporarily until all of the oil can be cleaned up. And so there's no telling if this oil refinery will ever be reopened. But it's also problematic because this island is inhabited by mostly Latinx and Black people. And these people don't have a say in their political processes, and therefore they cannot communicate to their government and to the continental territory of the US that there is environmental injustice going on, and that this oil spill has been occurring for decades, and that the Biden administration is appearing as a hero, even though this should have happened decades ago, from the very beginning when the first oil spill happened, when the first fires from the oil spill happened. And so that is why I wanted to highlight the case study of the US Virgin Islands, because this is not just the first time that this is happening. This is occurring throughout the other islands of the Virgin Islands, and it's not just with oil, it's with other things that the United States has decided to dump on the US Virgin Islands, because it is locality-wise, it is very far from the US, and therefore it is not in the day-to-day minds of American people as to what is happening as a result of the decisions that the United States is making. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank all three of y'all. Really appreciate those presentations. And if y'all don't mind, I was going to toss a question your way, particularly to Kiana and Jude, because Julia, you spoke a lot about what's going on right now, with this situation. So Kiana and Jude, I'm wondering, and also not trying to test you here, so no worries if you don't know what's going on. It's, just wondering, for instance, Kiana, do you know of people who live in Norfolk, of any local movements going on, of people speaking out about this? And then Jude, what you were talking about, I mean, first of all, it's powerful that this is the place that you grew up, and so, but it made me think about the Biden's recent infrastructure bill. And I wonder if there's any particular intersection with that and the talk of justice in relation to exactly the topic you were bringing up. Kiana, Jude.
So I'm actually from Virginia, but I'm from the northern tip of Virginia. And I don't personally know anyone there or have heard of movements, but having friends who go to William and Mary, which are other schools in Virginia, I know that it's a bigger topic of discussion there, because Norfolk is one of the main cities in the US that is at very high risk to sea level rise. So I know that the conversation is happening, especially in the state schools in Virginia, particularly William and Mary, but I can't really identify things in Norfolk.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Also, I used to live in Richmond and Suffolk. And so I probably about 6 or 7 years. So I have some idea of like how important Chesapeake Bay and James River and just all the water there is to life, the economy, the ecosystem, and everything in the area. Yeah. So thanks a lot for that report. And Jude?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Biden's infrastructure bill, but I think that the city of Syracuse got something like $2 billion, maybe, or $2 million. I know it's a big difference, but it's one of the two to rebuild the highway or, do what they will. And I think there actually is a pretty large local movement. I think it's called like Bomb 81 or something like that. And they're like basically petitioning and fighting for like an alternative to just rebuilding the highway as it is, even like maybe like a tunnel underneath the city, or like making kind of like a communal grid main street, like 5-lane main street. So
yeah, no, thanks. That's fascinating. I imagine it could be difficult to come to a consensus about what is the most ethical or helpful or healthy way forward in trying to fix or counteract that situation.
Yeah, and I think definitely the people that are living in those communities need to have the highest represented voice. I mean, I don't know if that's going to be the case, but hopefully.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Kiana. Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Julia, for those fantastic presentations. So, unfortunately, the United States is far from the only area in which disparate distribution plays out. Around the world, huge gaps exist between those who enjoy environmental benefits and those who bear environmental costs. These inequities are historic and systemic through the ongoing violence of colonialism, slavery, displacement, segregation, and militarization. But the framework of environmental justice reminds us to never fall into the trap of regarding someone merely as a victim. Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian communities are not simply the passive subjects of environmental racism. They hold and exert multiple forms of relational agency and change-making power. The same is true of the environment itself. During our unit on radical recognition, we worked to be less anthropocentric, decentering human perspectives and learning to appreciate a wider diversity of voices and the rights of nature. Building on Julia's examination of oil in St. Croix, here is Sophie Creager-Roberts sharing a poem speaking for the fossil fuels we so violently dig up and burn.
Hello, I'm Sophie, and the poem I'll be reading was inspired by the idea that past and future generations are often excluded from environmental decision-making. Throughout the stanzas, I conveyed the forms of power fossil fuels hold over humans and then vice versa. I also depicted the convergence of interest between marginalized humans and exploited resources and how this can be used for making demands collectively. My hope is that this poem provokes similar dialogue when readers encounter underrepresented stakeholders. So now I'll just read the poem, which is titled Doomed to Destroy. Buried, unbothered for millions of years, laid to rest in the company of siblings, fallen flora bonded by one name, carbon. Became one under the heat and pressure and time without knowing how dangerous we would become for Earth who created and raised us. Jolted from our reverie, displaced from our basins, dirtying the hands of vulnerable miners, poisoning, depressing, killing the excavator, yet enriching and emboldening the investor. Infamously the enemy of our own descendants, our exhumed bodies unleash epidemics for every living creature. We are culprits of the fever plaguing the planet, choking the atmosphere. The revolution we sanctioned fueled colonial empires, artificially rearranging, restricting, replacing indigenous life. Reliance required. Resurrection was never in our plan. Rest was interrupted without consultation. From us or from those who occupied the lands above our grave. Jointly, we call for an end to this exploitation. We, your so-called fossil fuels, are not inherently villainous. We refuse to take the blame for human disregard, anthropomorphic greed. Not a scapegoat, dirty energy, nor a necessary evil. We're exhausted by your defamation of the dead who lived and died millennia before anyone alive today. First, we were novel, necessary, extraordinary. Now, our community exists in diaspora, in the earth, tossed to the margins, emitted and forced to seek asylum in the atmosphere, forever disparaged by how we've been manhandled. Humans see their profit as finite, not our very existence. Someday the natural order will be restored, whether you and your children are around to see it has yet decided. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Sophie, you are a poet, my friend. Don't ever let no one tell you otherwise, okay? I was getting alliteration, okay? I wrote down jilted from our reverie. You gave us, that's a beautiful perspective that you have just given us, so thank you. All right. So, many environmental campaigns focus on dramatic landscapes and iconic animals. We use slogans like save the whales, not save the krill. But in their agency artwork assignment, many students chose to spotlight the everyday forms of nature that often go overlooked, yet are every bit as critical for sustainability and conservation. Next up, we're going to hear from Ryan D., who will share some of his photography work that critiques the hierarchy between pristine and wild flora. Ryan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan. So this piece is meant to represent the agency of non-pristine plant life. I superimposed two photos shot on 35mm film, and one photograph displays wildflowers growing in an abandoned lakeside park in a town called Soap Lake in Washington State. And the other photograph was taken in the famous Palm House at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Kew, England. So for some background, Soap Lake is a small city in the middle of Washington State with a population of just over 1,500. And although it is famous for mineral-rich waters that make up the lake, the town's population has decreased and aged steadily over the past 50 years. Soap Lake is attempting currently to revitalize its once prosperous tourist industry thanks to the health benefits of the lake, but for now it remains an overall economically depressed municipality in Washington State. On the other hand, Kew Gardens was founded in the early 18th century as a palace and estate for the British monarchy. Today it is a non-departmental public entity that informs British policymaking on issues regarding the natural environment and climate change. Kew aspires to end the extinction crisis and protect and manage nature in a sustainable way. A standard ticket to the experience to the many greenhouses and gardens costs around 20 pounds. So non-pristine nature is largely ignored by scientists, ecologists, and conservationists. Currently, the majority of work being done to protect Kingdom Plantae focuses on returning environments to a pristine state or preventing damage to those already in that condition. Little attention is given to the everyday landscapes that surround us. Yet the majority of Earth's surface is covered by non-pristine plant life, which provides critical support for human life. Agriculture, the majority of carbon sequestration, water filtration, soil creation, and the shoring up of hillsides are just a few of the necessary processes wild plants provide. Additionally, non-pristine plant life are the first life forms to recolonize deserted landscapes. They provide the foundation for full ecosystems and biodiversity to return to an area. Thus, this piece is trying to convey that greater representation needs to be given to the abilities of wild plants. Instead, we pay money to observe perfectly cultivated and nurtured plants in an artificial setting. Ironically, though, many of the plants we seek out in arboretums and gardens are ignored or destroyed in other parts of the world. We must turn our notions of conservationism upside down if they are to recognize the agency of non-pristine nature. So this piece, Nature v. Nurtured, seeks to exemplify this new relationship, and it highlights the power of non-pristine plants while showing our current obsession with an ideal image of nature.
See, y'all be preaching on stuff I ain't never thought of. You know, language can be so violent, just the pristine. There's so much caught up in that term. I'm like, thank you for bringing that to light, Ryan. I had never even heard of or looked at said divide, so appreciate that. All right, next up, let's talk about trees. We are now going to hear from Cathy Sheridan-Lee as she shows us some glass fusion art that is inspired by the planet's lungs. Cathy, over to you.
Hopefully I can do this right. I feel that trees are important to the environment. When I was a kid, there was no electronic devices, cell phones, internet, and technology like today. My sisters and I played outside in the neighborhood and in our yards in the park. It was across the street from our house. I find peace in making some of my artwork about trees to trigger memories and sounds and feelings within me. Especially with the sounds of the wind blowing in the trees, and depending on what time of the year it is, the sound would be different. Small pine trees that are around my deck make me think of life. When I created pieces with scrap glass, make me think about the living birds within the tree. I see the birds fly in and out, making nests near. Sorry. Hear them chirp in early spring through the fall. The pictures of the tree in my art agency artwork is a tree I replanted from my house near the road and back to the shoreline of the lake. I knew that the old willow tree would die, and I wanted to starting the disease, and the branches have fallen off in the past. I planted to replace the old black willow tree and replace a provide shade and a place for the birds, squirrels, and animals to live and climb within to live. And this is one of my other pieces. Hopefully I held them up good enough so everybody could see them, but thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, thank you. It's so beautiful. Y'all, this class is beautiful. It makes me think of Stephen Sondheim passed away recently. He was a composer and lyricist of musicals. And there's this line from a song in a musical he wrote called Sunday in the Park with George that is, give us more to see. So George is a painter, and just that idea of like new vision or more vision. Give us more to see. That's what I feel and felt in your work and all y'all's work. So thank you, for real. Okay, last but certainly not least, Vanessa Luingafe invites us to listen to the voice of water through her painting, And When It Rains, It Pours.
Hi, I hope you guys can all see that okay. So for my agency artwork, I chose to do painting utilizing watercolor and ink to portray water as a stakeholder. I focused on large bodies of water in my illustration. And so, for example, the ocean is a non-human and non-animal stakeholder that is underrepresented in environmental decision-making. Water exerts energy over others by providing life through existing as a fresh water source, nurturing beings, and providing space for water organisms to exist and live. Water is a provider, a connector. It covers the planet more than almost any other being or stakeholder. So for my piece, I made sure to make sure that the water takes up a large portion of the framing. And for my stakeholder being bodies of water and natural spaces, I chose for this body to display this emotion and response to no longer wanting to be polluted. So in response, the water acts out to be more sensitive to climate change, to no longer being it's acting out to like no longer representing being a fit environmental place for living beings, and no longer clean enough to supply clean water to beings. Power is used against water in terms of material power, with microplastics, general garbage, chemicals, and other forms of harmful waste being dumped into its various bodies. Water loses its credibility for its long reputation of being clean, nurturing, and providing supplement to life to organisms all around. And my artwork represents water being upset with its current state. The eyes personify the body of water, evoking life into it, in a sense, humanizing the water. So by humanizing this inanimate object, it allows for the curation of empathy by providing a relatable perspective for us humans. And so furthermore, I added the phrase, "and when it rains, it pours," representing both the emotive state of the body, the sadness through expelling tears, and the body's response to the ongoing climate change crisis affecting the stakeholder. Example, rain, change in weather, floods. And lastly, I used watercolor to further emphasize how much water is intertwined with life, art, and all that we do. Thank you.
And thank you. Something that caught me, I don't know what caught y'all, was I guess the directionality within the painting. It felt, you know, that it was expanding in all the up, down, side to side flow. It was difficult to tell, you know, what the direction was. And because of that, it felt sort of ever expanding, along with all the layers you just mentioned. So that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, y'all. At this point, we are symbolically 2/3 of the way through the course. And if you're anything like we were at this point in the semester, you're like, okay, but what do we do about all this? Because there's a lot of terrible things going on in the world, and it's great to acknowledge problems and recognize diverse stakeholders, but shifting our perspectives alone won't solve these long-standing systemic injustices. The third dimension of environmental justice is participation. Yes. Involving all of the diverse stakeholders we just recognized in decision-making in order to bring about more equitable outcomes and experiences. During the last part of class, we learned about grassroots initiatives responding to environmental injustice through community organizing techniques. Our online learning took us everywhere from a youth-led initiative in Rwanda using tree planting to build peace after the genocide, to a fog harvesting group in Morocco using clouds to supply indigenous homes with running water. We spent time in British Columbia learning how the Sekedine Nation weaves together traditional ecological knowledge and Western environmental science for sustainable land policies. And then we journeyed to Oceania to learn about sovereignty and solidarity from Pacific Islanders. We gleaned collective action techniques from food sovereignty movements in Latin America and were inspired by a social enterprise in Atlanta, Georgia, investing in the Black food supply chain. In other words, y'all done did a lot. And then we brought it home by developing our own community campaigns for action. We like to highlight a few of them. First up is Bianca Indelicato, who will share an awareness-raising campaign for We Act in Harlem. Then Julia Evans Asano will take the mic again in hopes of removing the statue of Columbus standing in the center of Syracuse. Bianca.
Hey everyone, my name's Bianca Indelicato, and today I will be presenting my community campaign. For my campaign, I'm going to be addressing the poor living conditions and housing segregation for Latino and Black people that are living in Harlem, New York. So I'm going to give you a little background on Harlem. Harlem is located in uptown Manhattan and nearly has a population of 200,000. In 1880, Harlem was introduced to elevated rail lines placed within the city. This gave easy access for everyone. They also have stops within the Bronx and goes as far as Brooklyn. So after the First World War, many Blacks migrated from the South in hopes of increased wages and better opportunities. So many migrated to New York and eventually Harlem. In the 1920s, Harlem flourished. We know this as the Harlem Renaissance. But soon after the Harlem Renaissance came the Great Depression, and it devastated Harlem. This was because of the unemployment, high rent, and just the racist practices all throughout the country. From then onward, Harlem has had an increased crime rate, increased real estate, and gentrification. Harlem is exposed to a 6-lane highway, exposed to a high-speed rail system, and a sewage treatment plant. So what is the North River Sewage Plant? So this was created in 1985, and it processes all of Manhattan's raw sewage. And over 170 million tons a day goes through that plant. Many of the Harlem residents complain of shortness of breath, itchy eyes, respiratory alignment, odor, and asthma. We Act was created in 1988 due to the sewage plant, and they demanded change in their neighborhood. It is an environmental group that helps rebuild a healthy community for people of color and low-income families. My goal in this community campaign is to kind of extend their message on what is happening within Harlem. My goal is to bring awareness on what is happening inside of Harlem with a focus on the North River Sewage Plant. Social media is going to be my main use of my campaign. Many don't realize where their waste ends up and don't even think twice about it. So my goal is to reach out to representatives, have social media influencers posting about it, and use targeted ads towards people living in New York City that might be living outside of Harlem that don't know where their sewage is going or what is going on. The North River Sewage Treatment Plant is just kind of a tiny speck onto what is happening within Black and Latino communities all around America. It goes beyond power plants and sewer plants, and environmental racism is really embedded in poor communities of color all throughout America. Many times people don't even think twice about where their sewage is going or what's happening because it doesn't affect them. So the message this campaign is trying to send people outside of these communities are the ones who don't even have to think twice about where if their water's safe to drink, where their waste goes, or if the air they're breathing in is healthy. In order to protect children and families of color and our planet, these things like this need to be addressed and aware. Our own human activity is responsible for problems that are occurring, and with organizations like We Act, environmental justice is brought to a front. So with the work that they are doing in my social media campaign to help Harlem, nationwide awareness about what's happening within these communities isn't such an unrealistic goal. And that is the end of my presentation. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email.
Julia, over to you.
So when looking for a issue to create like a local campaign on, I noticed that in order to combat environmental justice, we have to first look at the systems that already exist and how we can combat those, and also to understand the local community and the local issues that are happening. And something that I noticed that is happening as of right now is the issue surrounding the Columbus statue at Columbus Circle in Syracuse, New York. This has been an ongoing discussion since 2018, where the mayor of Syracuse created a quote unquote diverse panel of 23 members to discuss what to do with the Columbus statue, what it means to the city of Syracuse, and what it means for the future of the city of Syracuse. And it was decided that the Columbus statue would be taken down. However, in February of 2021, one of the panel members who's of Italian descent filed a lawsuit against the mayor, saying that the mayor does not have the legal authority to do so. And what is interesting is that the reason why I chose this is because of the way that the Onondaga Nation is involved in this, and that they submitted an amicus curiae, and an amicus curiae is something that you submit to the courts when you feel that during a court case that there is no involved party that could properly represent you, but you still want to present information regarding the case. And so the Onondaga Nation did so because they felt that no person had the proper expertise to properly voice the experiences of the Onondaga Nation except for the Onondaga Nation itself. And that is why it submitted the amicus curiae. And one of the most interesting things about this is that the Onondaga Nation claims that there's no one else has the legal authority to decide what to do with the Columbus statue, as it does overall stand on land that has been given the treaties that were passed during the history of the United States, that it is part of the territory that belongs to the Onondaga Nation. And the reason why that this Columbus statue would be harmful to the present and the past is the way that physically it is harmful, because how it has 4 of the indigenous people's heads at the bottom of the Columbus statue underneath his feet, but also how it is memorializing the historical trauma that Columbus and his crew brought to the indigenous people. But the reason why that this is an issue is because the court recently, as of last month, rejected this amicus curiae, saying that the Onondaga Nation's amicus curiae will not be assessed. And I would like, as a student of Syracuse University, I think that Syracuse University students should be more aware of the current events happening, not just with environmental racism, but the political issues that are happening within the indigenous communities as well as the local community, because Syracuse University does stand on the lands that historically belonged to the Onondaga Nation and still does. And so I think that the university could do a better job of keeping us updated on current events. And so I decided that for the campaign, it is very vague and broad, because I don't want to create a campaign without hearing the voices of the Onondaga Nation to see what us outsiders can do to better support them. But I think for this campaign, I wanted to create an opportunity with the partnership of the Native Student Program at Syracuse University and the Office of Multicultural Affairs to help guide a movement to give students the power to pressure local authorities without overstepping the line of speaking for the Onondaga Nation. First, there is an organizer for a petition to take the Columbus statue down, and he is a grad student at Syracuse University. So I would like to reach out to Blake. His name is Blake Garland Terrado, to see what the process of creating the petition was like, what the numerical goals are, before discussing what Syracuse University can bring to the table if students and faculty participated in the movement to pressure local authorities. And then the next step of this campaign would be to reach out to the Onondaga Nation to host a workshop at SU to establish boundaries on how the Syracuse University students can support the Onondaga Nation, in this case without speaking for them, so that it also creates a framework for how we could continue to support the Onondaga Nation with other issues and future issues. And lastly, the campaign would go on to create templates the email out to the mayor of Syracuse and the county judge to pressure them, as well as other local authorities such as the state senator and also the Syracuse council members, and email them to pressure them to accept the amicus brief of the Onondaga Nation and then to remove the Columbus statue. And so I created templates with the emails of each of these authorities so that if this campaign were to come into fruition, that people could use them.
Thank you all both so much for those fascinating and insightful presentations. Okay, everyone, we have one last piece to share with you. Y'all ready for this? This is very much the culmination of our semester and our showcase. What you're about to see was written and performed by the entire Climates of Resistance community, led by Micah Hindler and Austin Willisey of Raise Your Voice Labs. This collective music video was inspired by the teachings of the great peacemaker of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We thank and honor all the faith keepers who have so diligently protected his lessons from the violence of cultural erasure, sharing wisdom with generations to come.
When you sit and you counsel for the welfare of the people, think not of yourself, nor of your family, or even your generation. He said, but make your decisions on behalf of the 7th generation coming.
How we are with our environment will be our way with one another. The voices crying out come from our sisters and our brothers. And if we hear, will we listen to the trees and seas a-glisten, to the calls of liberation, to the 7th generation.
60 stations, 7 generations, thoughts sinking, many reparations could be bringing, edge of devastation, corporations, leverage over nations, carbon cages, sparking hatred, garden spaces, lost relations, to our roots and our foundations, trading truth for quick sensations, made their use, now they're escaping. Let our youth heal this pain with learning from our own mistakes, self-sustained with oceans, lakes, forests, trees, bees, and snakes, with open heart, mind, ears to make a shared space to live in grace. Our home is sacred, let's keep it safe.
How we are with our environment will be our way with one another. The voices crying out come from our sisters and our brothers. And if we hear, will we listen to the trees and seas a-glisten, to the calls of liberation, to the 7th generation.
At the mouth of the river, the water comes face to face with a sea of rubbish, welcoming it to the ocean. Microplastics, chemicals, sewage, fishing line, electronics, pesticide, plastic bottles, clothing, oil, suffocating it. If water could talk, if water could breathe, just for one moment, drip, it would scream for our help. We are water.
How we are with our environment will be our way with one another. The voices crying out come from our sisters and our brothers. And if we hear, will we listen to the trees and seas a-glisten, to the calls of liberation, to the 7th generation. Within it, the dreams of ages past, filled with peace and justice, hoping it'll last. The river carries with it fears of those to come, calling out for action, vulnerable and wrong. I am here today, thanks to yesterday. The wisdom of the elders showing us the way. They all play a part in sustainability. sisters and our brothers. And if we hear, will we listen to the trees and seas that glisten, to the calls of liberation, to the seventh generation.
So, are the leaders of the world today making decisions on behalf of 7 generations or on behalf of 1%?
Wow, that was fire. Yo, thank you all for coming to this. This marks the formal end of our showcase, but we'll keep the Zoom open for more informal conversation. Please feel free to stick around and ask the artists questions and the presenters any questions. And we love y'all, and Climates of Resistance out.